How's that, buddy? Good. Glad y'all made it back for tonight. We're going to finish at least the teaching part of our series on how Christians should think about politics. And so let me pray and we'll get started. Father God, we thank you so much for a good Sunday. God, we thank you for a good worship service this morning and meetings and things this afternoon. And now back here tonight to think about your word, study your word, and think about how it applies to our lives. And God, I pray you'd help us to do that well tonight. Help us to think well. Help us to ask good questions and have good conversations around this issue, this topic. And God, I pray that it wouldn't just be something kind of theoretical that we're talking about, but we would actually be thinking about and then here in the coming weeks and months putting these thoughts into practice in our lives and in the life of our nation. God, we thank you so much for Jesus and pray these things in his name. Amen. All right, well, we started this series back a few weeks ago at the beginning of August. And we spent the first week talking about just kind of in general where the idea of government comes from. We saw that God has established government authority and the governing authorities, the people that are in those positions. Last week we spent a lot of time talking about, the first week we also briefly kind of at the end talked about how the church has thought about these issues, different churches throughout history, and have gotten some things wrong. We talked about the Crusades, how some churches tried to mix Christianity and politics too closely. We talked about how some churches have tried to separate those things completely and say that Christians should not be involved in the world around us at all, and then other positions in the middle. Some saying that we should only focus on social change and not really the gospel at all. Others suggesting that we should only focus on the gospel and not any type of social realities at all. And then last week we spent the whole night really talking about two passages in the Bible, Romans chapter 13 and 1 Peter chapter 2. And those are probably the most important, the clearest, the most directly applicable passages in the Bible to this topic of politics, and talks about how we should submit to the rulers because God's put them in place for our good, to promote the good and to punish evil. And so we're going to pick up on that tonight. If you've missed those two and want to go back and listen to those, they're online. We're going to pick up tonight with that and kind of finish the teaching section. And then next week we will take a break because the Labor Day weekend we will not have an evening service next Sunday night. And then the following Sunday, which is September the 8th, we'll have the panel discussion with all your pastors up here answering all your questions or trying to answer all your questions. So if you have questions that come to you, keep those in mind. Maybe write them down so you don't forget. If you're here that Sunday the 8th, then we encourage you to ask those questions out loud here. But if you're kind of shy and don't like speaking up in front of people and don't want to do that, then you're also more than welcome to submit them in writing beforehand. You can just tell one of us, me or Matt or Josh or Jake. I think Jake's around here somewhere. He was earlier. Or you can email them to one of us or email them to the church office. Okay, so tonight we want to talk about how do we decide how to vote, okay? So we're not going to be talking about who to vote for, okay, or what to vote for. I'm not going to tell you that. If you want to ask those questions, you can ask at our next meeting on the 8th and see what kind of answers you might get. But that's not what I'm going to be doing tonight. I'm not going to tell you who I voted for, I don't think, or who you should vote for, or anything like that. But I just want to help us think about how should we make those decisions? How should we make the decision? What kind of things should we consider when we're trying to decide who to vote for, or if it's some type of referendum or something, how we should decide which position we should vote for, okay? And so let's start out in Jeremiah chapter 29. This is really the only passage that we're going to spend a lot of time in tonight. We'll talk about a few others. We'll mention a few others, but this will be the main one that we're going to start out with. Jeremiah chapter 29. Okay? And I'm going to read just a couple of verses, starting in verse 4, read down to verse 7. It says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and live in them, and plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and become the fathers of sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters and multiply there, and do not decrease." And then he says in verse 7, "Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will have welfare." Okay? Some interesting things about this passage. First of all, it's written to the people of Jerusalem, right? Or the people of Judah. Jerusalem was the capital of the kingdom of Judah. It's written to them, though, while they're living as exiles in Babylon. And so they've been sent away from Judah, from the kingdom, sent away from the promised land. The Babylonians have conquered them, and they've been sent to live as exiles in this other kingdom. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But he tells them two things here. He tells them, first of all, to be involved, right? He says, you should when you go there, you should build houses, and you should plant gardens. He's saying you should be involved. You should live there. That's where you're going to be living now, and so you should be living there. Be involved in the place where I'm putting you. Build houses, plant gardens, marry wives, and have kids, and give your daughters to husbands so that they can marry and have kids, and have your husbands marry wives and have kids. And so he's saying, live your life. Just because you're going into exile, just because you're going to be living away from the promised land that God had given them, he says you should still continue to live your life. You should still continue to do the things that God had commanded them to do before, right? And then we get to verse 7, and he tells them to do two things in verse 7, or for two reasons. He says in verse 7, "Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf." And so they're to seek the good of the city where they are. And they're to pray to the Lord for the city where they are, for its good, right? And so one thing that he's telling them to do is live their lives for the good of the city around them. To pray for this city, to whatever city they're placed in. And different ones will be put in different cities, I assume. But they're to pray for the city where they are. Pray for its welfare. Pray for its good. And this reminds me of a passage that we've talked about a little bit. We're not going to read it, because I think you're familiar enough with it, but remember in Mark chapter 12, and there's some other places in the other Gospels, Matthew and Luke as well, but in Mark chapter 12, if you want to look it up, verses 30 and 31, this is where they come and ask Jesus, which is the greatest of the commandments. Remember that? And Jesus says "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength," quoting from Deuteronomy. And then he says, "The second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." And I think he's quoting there from Leviticus. Jake might be able to tell us. He's been studying Leviticus a lot lately. But I think when he says, "Love your neighbor as yourself," I think he's quoting from Leviticus there. Yeah, Jake's saying that's right. And then you may remember after that, then that's when they ask, well, who is our neighbor? Trying to kind of get out of that, right? And that's when Jesus tells them the parable of the Good Samaritan, the man who's sick on the road, and the priest walked by, and the different ones walked by, and then the Samaritan, the enemy, walks by and stops, and he's the one that helps him. But the whole point of that is because he says that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength. That's the most important commandment. And then the second commandment is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do those two things, all of the rest of the law is built on those two things. If you keep those two commands, then you'll keep all of the rest of the law as well. And when we think about this topic of how should we think about voting and how should we think about our involvement in politics as Christians, this is one of the principles that sticks out, I think. And this is something you hear people talk about a lot, especially here lately. A lot of Christians talk about loving your neighbors yourself, and how do we do that? And they make a lot of people have made that this very broad thing, which it is a very broad thing, but has made it kind of contain almost anything. But that seems to be kind of the first principle that God is speaking through Jeremiah here. Pray for the city. Love the city, right? He says, seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. And so the first thing he tells them is to kind of look out for the city. The second thing he tells them, though, is to look out for themselves. Because the rest of verse 7 says, For in its welfare, in the welfare of the city, you will have welfare. Pray for the welfare of the city, because in doing so, you will also have welfare. And this reminds me of another passage that we read, I think, last week. You can turn there or you can stay in Jeremiah and just listen. But in 1 Timothy, I will read this passage because I don't think we're as familiar with it as we are the other one about loving your neighbor. 1 Timothy chapter 2, just the first two verses there. And Paul tells Timothy to tell the church, to lead the church. He says, first of all, then, I urge that entreaties and prayers and petitions and thanksgivings be made on behalf of all men, for kings and all who are in authority. So again, he's telling him to tell the church to pray for all men, pray for the people around you, especially pray for the leaders, the kings and those who have authority over you, right? So again, pray for them, kind of others focused. But then he also says, pray in verse 2, pray for kings and all who are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. Very similar, right? Pray for the welfare of the city, because as you do that, then you'll also have welfare. Here, pray for all men, especially rulers and authorities, because that you may live a quiet and tranquil life. And so if we think about this, let's go back to Jeremiah 29. If we think about this, there's a few things that I think we should still talk about in this passage before we move on. This seems applicable to us today. God's people here were living in a somewhat hostile culture. They've been exiled into Babylon. They were living under the rule of a secular, non-godly system of government. That describes our situation today pretty well, right? We live in a somewhat hostile culture, somewhat hostile to Christianity. We live in a nation that is ruled by a secular government and a non-godly government, right? That doesn't necessarily mean ungodly in every way, but non-godly, right? It's not the focus is not on pleasing God. And so if we apply this passage to us living today, then we get this principle. And especially in our system of government, because we have the right to vote in our system of government. And so if we apply this principle to us today, then we come up with something like vote for, when you're choosing who to vote for and what policies to vote for and referendum and stuff like that, vote for the person or the policy that you think will promote the common good, that you will think will bring about the most good for society, okay? That seems pretty straightforward, but it's really not, because there's a lot of questions that go behind that, and sometimes Christians have differences on some of those questions. And so we have questions like, well, okay, but what is the common good? If we're going to vote for the common good, we're going to vote for the welfare and try to promote the welfare of the people that live around us so that we can live peaceably and live in welfare as well. Well, what is the common good? And different believers, different Christians might come up with different conclusions on those matters. There might be some issues where I think one thing is good for our society and for churches in our society, and you might think a different position is good for society and good for churches in our society. But we should base what we think the common good is on the principles from the Bible, right? That's not always as easy as we think it might be, and we may disagree sometimes, but that should be the principle. We should look for the common good and find those principles from the Bible. We should also think about some other differences we have. Sometimes we might even agree on what the common good is based on the Bible, but we have maybe disagreements over who should accomplish that good. And we'll talk about an example here in a few minutes. But we may have difference over who should accomplish it. So we may still have some differences over, okay, this is what we think should happen, but should the government do this or should the churches do this? Does this fall within the realm of Caesar or within the realm of God? If you remember Jesus with the coin and the question about taxes, right? Pay to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. And so that's another difference. We may differ on what is the best thing, and we may differ over, even if we agree with that, we may differ over who should accomplish it. And then finally, we may differ, even if we agree on those two things, if we agree on what the good is and we agree on that the government should be doing this, then we may still have a different disagreements over how should it be done. And so there's lots of places here for Christians to come to different conclusions. And so let's take, for example, something like taking care of the poor, okay? I think we would all agree that the Bible says and that we should take care of the poor, and that's a biblical principle. We see that in the Old Testament. I think we see it in the New Testament as well, that we should take care of the poor. We should have mercy on the poor. But as Christians, some Christians believe that the church should be taking care of the poor, and some Christians think the government should be taking care of the poor. And some Christians think that there should be a place for both. Maybe there's some government programs that help the poor, and the church should also be working to help the poor. But that may be something that we disagree on. Even if we agree that that's a good thing, for their good and for the good of society in general, we may still have a disagreement over who should do that. Which realm does that apply? Is that part of the realm of Caesar, or is that part of the realm of God, or is that somehow mixed into both? And then finally, we may have a disagreement over how to best accomplish that. Which, even if we think the government should be doing it, or the government should have a hand in doing it, involved in some ways, we might still then have disagreements over which specific policies should be put in place to help solve this problem. And if we think about the two major political parties in our nation today, people who lean to one side might think that the other side is either ignoring the problem, or the other side's solutions make the problem worse. And someone who leans to that side might think, well, the other side is either ignoring the problem, or the solutions they propose are making it worse. And so all that to say that this is kind of a really difficult issue, and I think you probably knew that even before I brought all that up. This is a really difficult issue, and sometimes believers who believe the Bible and want to follow Jesus and want to follow Jesus as best we can in every area of our life, in every realm of our life, including how we think about politics and how we're involved in the political process and how we're involved in voting and all those kind of things, sometimes we can come to legitimately different positions, okay? And I'm going to kind of end with this as well, but when that's the case, we shouldn't demonize one another, right? There's a place for us to have conversations with each other and not to let that kind of separate us, okay? So as we're thinking about how to kind of guide ourselves and each other through those decisions, what are some things how are some ways that we should think about voting? And so we're going to talk about just kind of voting in general, and then we're going to talk about who to vote for, okay? And so just voting in general, there's several different kind of ideas that Christians have proposed over the years, different ways of thinking about voting in general. And so the first way of thinking is we just vote for the best candidate, okay? And that seems pretty straightforward. It is pretty straightforward. When you go to the polls and you're behind the curtain and you're about to punch the little hole through or make the mark with your pencil or whatever, you're looking at who is the best candidate. Who do you think is going to do the most good or is most likely to implement policies that will promote good results? Pretty straightforward, right? There's another way of thinking about voting, again, just kind of in general, and it's that when you go to the polls, nobody is going to be a good candidate, or nobody's going to be a perfect candidate, and so you should vote for the lesser of two evils. If you're talking about like a major political position like president or senator, House of Representatives, something like that, where there's usually two candidates. You look at the people running and you choose the lesser of two evils. And maybe it's not someone that you like. Maybe it's not someone that you wish would be running even. But you vote for the person that you think is least bad. Instead of voting for the person you think is best, you vote for the person you think is least bad. And maybe you think something like, well, I've only really got two real options. One of the major party candidates is going to win anyway. And so I'm going to vote for which one of those two I think is the worst. And to use kind of a common phrase, you may kind of hold your nose and vote anyway, overlooking some things that you don't like or some things you disagree with or some things you think are bad because you think the other candidate would be worse, okay? And then there's another way of thinking. Some Christians say, well, you should never do that. You should never vote for the lesser of two evils, because you're still voting for evil. Even if you're voting for less evil, you're still voting for evil in some way, right? And so another view is, well, you should, if you don't like either of the two main candidates, if you don't think either one of them is qualified or lines up with biblical principles, well, then you should write in someone or vote for a third party candidate that might be running. And the thinking behind that is both major party options are bad, and so I can't in good conscience vote for either one of those, because I would feel like that I'm voting for someone who's not qualified, and so I'm not going to vote for either one of the major parties. You can't vote for either one of those in good conscience. And so knowing that your vote will probably not result in your candidate winning, you vote for a third-party candidate or you write someone in. And the thinking behind that sometimes is that you can see that, you can view that as kind of sending a message that neither candidate was qualified in your view. You're sending a message to the Republicans and the Democrats that neither one of their candidates were worthy of your vote, and so you're voting for someone that you think is worthy. Okay? Or another option is you just don't vote, right? If both parties are really bad, both candidates you think from the major parties are really bad, you can't vote for either one of those in good conscience, and so you just don't vote. And maybe you still vote for other elections, right? Maybe you still vote for Senate or for representative or for mayor or whatever other positions might be on the ballot, but you don't vote for whatever position, president, senator, mayor, whatever position you think where the two candidates, neither one of them are qualified, you leave that race blank. Some people think that's a bad option because they think it's unethical not to vote. There's some Christians who say it's unethical not to vote, that if you don't vote, that's bad, okay? And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that we should vote. I think we have a responsibility to vote, but I think that responsibility comes from being a good citizen, not from being a Christian, right? Not voting might make me not a good citizen, but it's not going to make me not a good Christian, I don't think. I don't think it's a sin necessarily not to vote, although I think that you should vote, right? Hopefully you understand what I'm saying there. And so those are kind of some options people have come up with. The way that we should think about this is I'm gonna look at the candidates on the ballot and I'm gonna select the one that I think is best. Or I'm gonna select the one that I think is the least bad. Or I'm gonna write in my own person or vote for a third party, or I'm just not gonna vote at all. And there's reasons for and against each of those. But now I want us to kind of switch from general and think more specifically. And I don't have any specific issues or specific candidates in mind. If you have questions about those, then I would encourage you to ask those here in a few minutes. But I want us to think about some principles behind how do we decide who we vote for, okay? And so the first thing I would say is we should be careful to vote for people, not parties. We should be careful to vote for people, not parties, okay? Some of you all need to hear this. The Democratic Party is not a godly political party, okay? If Jesus were on earth today physically, I don't think he would be a member of the Democratic Party, okay? But I think some of you also need to hear that the Republican Party is also not a godly party. And if Jesus were physically on earth today, I don't think he would be a member of the Republican Party. Both of the parties that kind of dominate politics in our nation have policies and have positions that go against the teaching of the Bible. Both of them do. There are things that we can pick out. You know, the Democratic convention just ended this week on Thursday. The Republican convention was a few weeks before. It was actually when I was in the Dominican Republic. It was CNN was the only channel on the TV in my hotel that was in English, and so I watched some of that convention from Dominican Republic in the evenings at night. But both of those conventions just ended, and we could go through both of those conventions as a church. We're not going to, but we could. We could sit down together and get on YouTube or whatever and go back and listen to all the speeches together from the Republican convention. And then we could listen to all the speeches together from the Democratic convention. We could go through and read the Republican Party platform. We could go through and read the Democratic Party platform. And we could find things in both of those platforms, and we could find things in speeches from both of those conventions that go against what the Bible says. And so that's the first thing. We should, I think we know this, it kind of goes without saying, but we should be more committed to Jesus than we are to either political party, right? We should be more committed to Jesus than we are to either political party. We should be more committed to the Bible and what the Bible teaches than we are to either political party. And when one political party or the other political party has a position on an issue that goes against the principles of the Bible, well, then we should say that that's bad, right? And so then we go back to those different strategies for voting that I was mentioning before. This is why some people say, well, you have to vote for the least bad, because neither one of them are perfect. If you talk about the two major parties and people running for elections, neither one of those parties are perfect. And so you have to think through, okay, well, what things do they stand for that I disagree with versus what things does this candidate stand for that I disagree with, and kind of weigh those out and see which of those positions are worse and which of those positions are better, or which of those positions are bad and which of those positions are less bad. And so then who do I vote for? Which one of those people do I think is going to do the least harm based on the principles and things I think that the Bible teaches that's true? Both of these parties say things and present things in an effort just to gain votes from Christians. If you ever watch news coverage of election cycles, if you watch pundits and commentators on TV talk about the different parties and elections and campaigns, they talk about different voting blocks, right? They'll talk about people that have a certain education level, and they'll put those into certain blocks, right? And they'll say people that have a master's degree are more likely to vote for this candidate, and people with the high school diploma are more likely to vote for this candidate. People with a bachelor's degree are more likely to vote for this candidate. They'll do ages, they'll do sexes, right? Women and men. They'll do races, black, white, Hispanic, other, right? And they'll break all these people, all these potential voters up into all these different segments. And then the candidates, not just the news people, but the candidates do this. I think y'all know all this. And then they have people that work for them campaigns that develop strategies for how do we reach the people specifically in this block, right? How do we reach white women with a master's degree? Or how do we reach black men who live in this part of the country, the Northeast, right? Or how do we reach Spanish-speaking people in whatever? And they come up with very specifically targeted campaign strategies to target those specific groups of people. And they run campaign ads in specific parts of the country, hoping to reach those specific type of people that live in those specific parts of the country, right? And the way that they think about Christians is they think about us as just another voting block. They think about evangelical Christians, especially they'll talk about the evangelical vote, meaning that the evangelical churches, evangelical Christians are just another voting block to them. And so both parties are willing to say whatever they think it would take to get someone who's an evangelical Christian to vote for their candidate. And oftentimes they'll say whatever they think needs to be said without really any real intention of following through with what they say they're going to do, or without any real idea of how they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And so I bring all that up and say all that just to say that we should not be committed to any one party thinking that party has our best interest in mind, because that's not true. Now, we might look at the different party platforms and we might think that one party or another party is better than than the other party or a third party or something like that. We can make judgments like that, but we shouldn't be naive enough to think that I'm going to be all in, committed fully to this group because they have my back, right? Because I think that's not the case. And so when we're thinking about who we're going to vote for or what issues we're going to vote for, if it's like a referendum or something, then we should think about the people more than we think about the party. The people should be more important to us than the party is. And so we should think about, so what positions is this specific person in favor of, and what positions is this specific person against? And that may be the same or may be different than what their party says. We should think about what kind of character does this person have? Do I think I can trust what she's saying? Do I think I can trust what he's saying? Okay, he's saying this about this issue and I like that, but do I think he's actually going to follow through and do what he says? Or she's saying that she thinks this particular policy or this particular action is bad and she's going to do something to do away with that, but what do I think about her integrity? Do I think she's actually going to follow through with what she says, and is she actually going to do what she is promising to do? Can they be trusted? Do they have a track record? If this is somebody that served in other offices before or even served in the same office before, if it's an incumbent, do they have a track record? They're saying these kind of things, but I'm going to look back and see what they've done in the past. And is what they've done in the past, does it match what they're saying now? Or does it not match what they're saying now? Is what they've done in the past, does that line up with what I think is best based on biblical principles, or does what they have done in the past show that they're different from what I think is best based on biblical principles? And so that's the first thing I would say as we're thinking through who should we vote for and deciding specifically who to vote for and what positions to vote for. Look at the person over the party. The second thing I would say is be informed. If we're going to look at the person instead of the party, that means we need to be informed. We need to know who we're voting for, and we need to know what we're voting for. And so we should know about the people that we're voting for. We should know about the people that are on the ballot that we may vote, that we may not vote for. Okay? And I don't mean that you need to go home every night as soon as you get off of work and just be glued to the TV, 5 or 6 hours a night to these cable news networks or whatever, or YouTube or whatever it might be, and just get so caught up in it because you think that's the most important thing in life, and all your hope is tied up to who gets in what office or what position or whatever. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that you need to be informed about who you're voting for, about what you're voting for. Not just voting someone because they have a certain letter beside their name, but knowing something about them and knowing the positions they hold and knowing, again, going back to can you trust them and do they have integrity and those kind of things. And maybe if you're not informed, then maybe you shouldn't vote, okay? If you're not informed, maybe you shouldn't vote. And I told you that I'm not going to tell you who I voted for or didn't vote for, but I'm going to make one exception to kind of illustrate this point. There's several times that I've gone up to Fairdale Christian Church, that's where I vote, the gym at Fairdale Christian Church. There's several times I've gone up there, and it's time to vote, November, whatever, and there's a whole list of positions, right? There's a president, there's senators, representatives, state representatives, all these different people, PVAs, whatever that is. I know what that is, property value assessor. All those kind of things. And then sometimes there's a list of judges. And maybe you pick 2 out of the 5 or 3 out of the 6 or something, right? And there have been several times where I've gone up to vote and I've been informed, I think I'm informed, and I start voting, and then I get to the bottom where it's got the judges, and I don't know who any of those people are. I have no idea who they are. I see 6 names that I've never heard before in my life, don't know anything about them, don't know who they are, nothing about them at all. And so there have been times where when I'm in the voting booth doing that, I vote for all the races, and I get down to judge, and I just leave that part blank. Because I don't know anything about these people. I don't know who's good and who's bad. I don't know who I should be voting for or who I should not be voting for. And so there's times, I'm not saying that you have to do that, but I'm saying if we're not informed about something, it might be better not to vote than to vote. Because being uninformed about something and just choosing the name that sounds best to you, or choosing the name that you've heard before, that you recognize, but if we don't know anything about those people, we don't know really what we're voting for, whether it's good or bad or whatever. So if we're not informed, if we don't know that much about them, it might be better in some of those situations just not to vote. The third thing I would say, vote for the person, not the party, be informed. The third thing I would say, and this one is really big. It's really short on my page, but it's really big in my mind. The third thing is that we should be consistent. We should be consistent. We should hold everyone to the same standard. Often, this happens all the time. You'll be watching a news station or talking to somebody, and some politician will have said something or done something, and say it's well, I won't say that, but one politician has done something or said something, and they'll be interviewing somebody that's part of the same party as that person, and they'll be making excuses. Well, it's not as bad as it seems, and all this kind of other stuff. Be making excuses for them, right? And then they'll interview somebody from the opposing party, and they'll just talk about how this is the worst thing that's ever happened. It's the end of the world. Can't believe this person would do this. Can't believe that people are acting like this is not a big deal, and just go on and on and on about it, right? Then another politician will do the exact same thing or say the exact same thing, but be from the other party, and they might even have the same people on interviewing them. And this time, the one before that said his guy, it wasn't that big a deal, is now saying, oh, this is the worst thing ever, and all because it's someone from a different party, right? And then now the person that's from his party is saying, oh, this is not a big deal, this is not the worst thing, this thing's happen all the time, this is not a big deal at all. And before, he was saying, or someone from his position was saying, this is the worst thing ever, because it was someone against his party, right? And we should have the same standard for all people. We shouldn't have a double standard. We shouldn't make excuses for people just because we like them, or we shouldn't make excuses for people just because they're from the party that we vote for most. And we shouldn't judge others more harshly because they're from a party that we don't like, or they're a person we don't like, right? We should have the same standard for both. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that right now. I'm thinking of an example that I should give, but I'm probably not going to. Okay, and so then the fourth thing is we should vote for person over party, we should be informed, we should be consistent, and then the last thing I'll say is that we should be understanding. We should be understanding. Other believers might come to a different conclusion than you come to. I mentioned this earlier. Other believers might come to a different conclusion than you come to. We should be understanding about that. We should not demonize other believers because they come to a different position than we come to. And for one reason, we don't know why they came to that position. It might be that they're less informed than we are. It doesn't mean necessarily that they're a bad Christian or they don't love Jesus or they haven't read the Bible, right? It may be that they're less informed, or it may be that they're more informed than we are. We don't know why they came to that position. And then the other thing is, it may not even be a difference in policy or a difference in position. We may agree on the substance, but they may have a different view on how to accomplish that. They may have a different view on how to bring that about how to accomplish the position that we both agree on, right? Maybe both of us think that we should help the poor. And maybe both of us think, like the example I've already given, maybe both of us think that the government should have a part in helping the poor. But maybe you come up with a different way the government should help the poor, and I come up with a different way that the government should help the poor. And I'm voting for one candidate because I think they're going to help the poor the way that I think is best, and you're voting for a different candidate because you think they're going to help the poor the way that you think is best. We both agree that the Bible says we should help the poor. Our disagreement is over how should we do that and how should we accomplish that. And so we should be understanding with one another. We should not let it destroy a relationship. Should not let it destroy a relationship. Even if you can't understand how in the world another believer could possibly come to the opposite position on an issue than you have, we still shouldn't let it destroy the relationship. You should, I shouldn't have said don't, you should give the other person, the other believer, the benefit of the doubt. and have conversations with them. We shouldn't be afraid to talk to one another. We shouldn't be so angry about stuff and so upset about stuff and so invested even that we can't even have a conversation with one another. And we can't let each other know that we might disagree and do it in a way that's not disagreeable, do it in a way that's not going to destroy and end a relationship, right? Sometimes I think, I'll say this first and then I'll say that. You know, we do women's Bible studies on Thursday mornings. And there was a time, I won't say who, but there was a time back in 2016, I guess, when President Trump was running against Secretary Clinton, right, Hillary Clinton. And we have, and leading up to that, you remember all the debates and all the kind of animosity and how everybody was so fired up about that election on one side or the other side. And we had, you know, people that would come to women's Bible study, and we had one lady that would come wearing Trump shirts and Trump hat, so much in favor of Trump. And we had another lady who would come to the exact same Bible study with Hillary buttons, Hillary pins on the strap of her purse, and talking about how much she was in favor of Hillary and how much she wanted Hillary to win and all this kind of stuff. And both of them felt very strongly about their positions. The one that was supporting Trump felt very strongly that Hillary was an evil choice, a bad choice that was going to do great harm to our country if she got elected. And the lady that was in favor of Hillary thought that Trump was an evil person and was going to do great harm and great evil to our country if he got elected. But they were still friends with each other. And they didn't let that divide their relationship, at least not that I could tell. I don't think they did. If they did a really good job of hiding it because I couldn't tell. They talked to each other. They loved each other. They would do things together. There was no animosity personally between the two of them at all, even though they felt very strongly about the positions that they held. And that's how we should be as believers. Okay. Also, these things are really, really complicated. It's really, really complicated. If it was just a, you know, when we're electing someone, when we're voting for someone, if it was really just one issue, then it wouldn't be that complicated at all, right? You'd vote for the person you thought was best on that issue, and you'd vote against the person that you thought was worst on that issue. Or if you thought they were both bad, maybe you wouldn't vote at all or write in a third candidate or the things that we talked about earlier, right? But that's not what it is. It's multiple issues on top of each other. And so when we're thinking through who should we vote, we've got two candidates on the ballot, and the first candidate, say there's 40 issues that we're thinking of. And maybe the first candidate, we really like what they think about 5 or 6 of the issues, but we don't like what they think about the other issues. And the other candidate, we really like what they think about 20 of the issues, but we don't like what they think about 10 of the issues. And so you might think in that situation, the obvious answer is, well, we'll vote for the one that we agree with on 20 out of the 30, and we'll vote against the one we agree with only 5 times out of the 30, right? But sometimes we think one or more of those 5 issues are more important than the 20 issues. Because we're not just thinking through, or we shouldn't just be thinking through who do we agree with the most, who we think is best, but we're also thinking through which issues are the most important, and which issues have the greatest impact and have the greatest consequences. And so I bring that up just to say that all of that gets really, really complicated. And so again, we should give each other the benefit of the doubt. We can talk to one another and try to convince one another to, you know, that maybe they should vote for the person that we think they should vote for, or the person we're going to vote for. Or we can have discussions even just trying to figure out, why are you voting for the person you think that you're going to vote for? Because I haven't decided yet. I don't really know who to vote for. Maybe you can help me think through who I should vote for. But we should remember and give one another the benefit of the doubt and not let it destroy relationships, because, again, these things are really, really complicated. And we've got to kind of weigh out how much agreement do we need and how much disagreement can we stand? And which issues, which topics do we think are more important? And if someone agrees on this but disagrees on this, how do we weigh that out, and how do we think through all those things, right? And so we should give one another the benefit of the doubt on those. Okay? So those last 4 things, kind of principles for deciding who we should vote for the person over the party, vote for people over parties, be informed about who you're voting for and what you're voting for, be consistent in how we think about people and think about issues and think about events and judge people and issues and events, And then be understanding with one another as we're all trying to kind of wade through these complicated things together. Okay? All right, we've got several minutes left, and that's the end of what I have prepared to say, planned to say. Do you all have any questions about kind of what we talked about tonight, or even things we've talked about the last couple of nights that you want to go ahead and ask now?